went up there, didn't find fairies, but we found these insects that disguise themselves as bees. And then I found this other piece of Welsh folklore that said the bees are the messengers of the fairies.
And this is what I played for him.
Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Hello and welcome to the Cuckoo Town Podcast, episode 23. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Wyatt, and today's episode is Fairies, Mushrooms, Bees and Gremlins with Jack Hunter, PhD. Jack is an anthropologist exploring the borderlands of consciousness, religion, ecology and the paranormal. Jack is the author of several books. These include Spirits, Gods and Magic and Manifesting Spirits, both from 2020, and he is the editor of a few books too. These include Mattering the Invisible, 2020, Greening the Paranormal, 2019, Damned Facts, 2016, Strange Dimensions, 2015, and Talking with the Spirits, 2014. This conversation was recorded on Zoom. It was a transatlantic call and the audio quality reflects that. But despite that, it's well worth a listen as Jack is a bright, entertaining, highly qualified, cutting-edge researcher. He delves deeply into the nature of our perceived reality, consciousness, our relationship to nature and the wider universe, alternate realms and all. Our conversation was fairly short, but it was interesting and fun. Jack and I were fellow contributors to Joshua Cutchin's recent Fairy Films book project. Jack wrote an excellent essay based on the Dark Crystal film. Jack is one of those one of those amazing blokes who seems to be good at everything. He's even a good musician. So make sure you listen right to the end of this episode, as I'm playing out this week with some of Jack's music. I began our conversation by asking Jack about his earliest strange experiences, as described in his brilliant Dark Crystal essay just mentioned. He began by telling us how he'd experimented with a guidance audio tape to attempt to engage with the Fae.
And the idea was that you listen to this tape and it took you on a guidance and you would kind of encounter, they would guide you to encounter fairies.
Right.
And me and my friend attempted this. This was, we were at the time when we found this tape. Yeah, we tried it, and obviously it didn't work for us. But sort of around about the same time that we'd done this little experiment, I had a dream about a cliff that was out the back of, not far from where my parents live, where I was living at the time, in Wales, in the Tanat Valley. There's a sort of an old exposed rock face from a quarry, because where I grew up was a big quarry place in the 1900s and early, late 1800s. And in the dream, I saw, it was as though I could see through the rock face. I saw into this sort of, it was like a small cavern, and it looked warm, and there was bracken on the floor. Like ferns that had been cut down and they'd gone all golden coloured. It had a real sort of golden glow. And I saw these creatures in there, and this is what I talk about in the chapter, Joshua's Fairy Films book. They kind of looked like the mystics from the Dark Crystal. Smooth faces, and they were kind of very slow moving, and I got the impression that I was getting a glimpse, sort of like hibernation. It was quite interesting, and I thought, maybe it was because we'd done that meditation and all of that kind of stuff. So that was interesting. So obviously it's a dream, so it's easy to say, it's just a dream. But obviously there are many different kinds of ways of thinking about dreams, and there are traditions that say that dreams allow us to access other worlds and all. In some way, the dream was a real kind of experience. But then the second fairy encounter that I had, this was a few years later. It was a little bit more grown up. I was a teenager, so first time that I tried magic mushrooms, and we did it. I had them at my best friend's house, and it was in his bedroom. And just extra context around this, which I think is probably relevant. The room that we had the mushrooms in was all sort of kitted out for ritual magic. My friend's brother was into Wicca, and there was a magic circle drawn out on the floor, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway,
yeah, I liked the comment in the Visit the Fairy Census. The guy said, "Where you'll find mushrooms, you'll find fairies."
Yeah, that's the other way that obviously, if it's a drug-induced experience, then it's easy for people to. That was just that.
Well, they don't want to go there, do they? It's that boggle threshold you talk about.
They don't want to exactly. Yeah, it exceeds the boggle threshold. And this was early for me, this trip, and it was my first one. So it was one, and there's never really been one that was quite as intense. And I saw across the room there was an old sort of Victorian-looking chest of drawers. The top drawer was kind of hanging out, and just left the drawer out. And I looked at the wood, and I saw in the wood. So this was two-dimensional. I saw what looked like a procession of little people. They had sort of long, pointy noses, pointy ears, really quite long, like almost like crescent moon kind of, like the man in the moon kind of. They had, they were obviously wearing clothes of some kind. They weren't naked, and they had wearing veils and things as well. And there was one at the head of the procession, which this female turned and looked and clocked them, and almost sort of wasn't really interested that I was there. And they just sort of, acknowledged me, and then they just carried on with their procession. And I don't know how it worked, whether they come out the end of the wood or... That was the extent of the experience. But then I remember the next day when my mum came to pick me up at my friend's house, and we'd obviously been tripping all night long. And I mentioned that I'd seen, said I'd seen fairies. And I remember getting this kind of response to that from my mum that was kind of negative. Not that she's...
Yeah, you've been taking too many mushrooms, Jack.
Exactly. Yeah. And that really got me thinking about why certain experiences are kind of okay to have and talk about.
Right.
And other kinds of experiences have a kind of reputation.
So I'm sort of guessing here that those experiences sort of informed your later, your career path. So they were always in the back of your mind, and it's like meant to be. I would say it's some sort of fate. I think you were meant to have those. They were some sort of education that was given to you, allowed.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I see it. I mean, I don't know, but would you see it like that, or would you just think it's happenstance?
I don't know whether there is a big plan, preordained or not, but I definitely whether there is a plan or not, it definitely influenced me. Got me asking questions about these experiences and also about the issue of reality, really.
This was a Zoom transatlantic call, and unfortunately not of the best quality. We had the occasional audio drop out. We'll pick up the conversation again, as I was suggesting to Jack that there are different realms between our sleeping and our awake states, which we may travel through on our way back from an altered state to our everyday waking state. This would also apply, of course, to various other altered states, not just sleeping, drug-induced, for example. So on the way back from this altered state, we may glimpse other realities, other beings, and they may glimpse us. To make it simple for us, we sort of number them from sort of 1 to 10. 1 is sleeping and 10 is wide awake. Maybe you're sort of coming through that scale, and as you're coming through that scale, you have access to these other layers.
I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, about this idea of there being multiple worlds.
Like the Everett theory.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly. There are many worlds. And when we look at, across like anthropology, religious studies and things like that, then obviously there are traditions where people, move between those worlds and things.
Yes.
And they all have, and this is kind of like common knowledge, really, this association with altered states of consciousness. There seems to be a real closure between worlds or realities and our states of consciousness. And I think that actually our realities are, they're fundamentally tied to our consciousness because we perceive.
Well, we're sort of dictating it, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. When we change our state of consciousness, then I think where we actually do change, our reality, or we do actually enter into other worlds. There's a physicist called, and he writes about how consciousness might actually be at sort of higher dimensional space. Consciousness is So when we have an altered state of consciousness, we actually do enter into an actual other world. Yeah, it could be that we slip over every now and again, or we have some kind of something that alters our consciousness in some way. And if consciousness and other worlds are kind of connected with each other in that way, then we could slip into a higher dimensional state unwittingly for a little while and experience maybe another version of this world. Or the possibilities are endless because we don't actually know reality.
Unfortunately, just as Jack was about to say the name of a physicist, the audio dropped out, so I'm going to add it here. The name he's referring to, I did double check with him, is Bernard Carr, Bernardcarr, Bernard Carr. And interestingly, he mentioned higher space. And I came across that concept before in an Algernon Blackwood story, and it was called Entrance and Exit, one of his best short stories, which looked into those ideas of going through different dimensions. Algernon Blackwood, I did an episode on this some time ago, he mentioned some other theories of his time, we're talking like 100 years ago plus, the likes of Boyle, Gauss and Hinton. In fact, it was episode 12 I did, Weird Woods and Higher Space. So it's worth having a listen to that as well. Okay, let's get back on with it. I asked Jack if he'd had any further strange experiences since his first mushroom trip.
Some of them I had quite a few in relation to my PhD fieldwork, because when I did my PhD, and my fieldwork was based with a group of spiritualist mediums in Bristol. Yeah, a good part of 7 years sort of researching them. So I did interviews with medium and the people who organised the circles and all this kind of stuff. And I interviewed spirits as well as part of my methodology to get spirits' perspective. Another part of my approach was to participate and engage with things to the full extent that I could possibly. That meant, participating in the seances, engaging in basically engaging in the ritual kinds of experiences. Yeah, so there was a couple of experiences that I had while doing that were really, for me anyway, even though it'd be major experiences, like I said before, across the board, for me they were kind of powerful. One was actually during the very first I attended, where the medium went into a trance. And they were trance mediums, so they were letting spirits kind of talk through their bodies. The medium was sitting in the cabinet, which is kind of like a curtained-off corner of the room in the dark. They talk of all different voices and these kinds of things. But then there was this one moment where I saw, and I was aware that I was in conditions and all of this kind of stuff, which can give you hallucinations, and I saw this green mat kind of appear over the face of the medium. And it looked like, to me, almost kind of like a cartoon-like stereotype kind of image of a Chinese monk. If someone said, imagine a Shaolin monk, you'd imagine a bald guy with yellow robe. That's what this face looked like. So it was this green face that appeared over the medium's face, and then it kind of disappeared around her chest area. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a strange thing to see. Mention it to anyone, because I don't want these people to think that I am making stuff up, or that I'm going to my first seance and saying I've had some kind of extraordinary experience, and kept it to myself. But then when we went back into the house afterwards to talk about the seance and all the different kinds of things that independently, someone said, did anyone else see that green face?
Right.
And
confirmation.
I had to say that I did. So I don't know what was going on there, whether it was an objective transformation of the medium's face, whether it was some kind of shared hallucination or something like that.
I told Jack about a fairly recent experience I'd had, a very strange one, along with a friend, Professor Payne. We were going to read the same book, which was Joshua Cutchin's Trojan Feast. We were then going to reconvene and talk about it on the podcast and see where that led us. You'll hear more in a minute. But basically that decision sparked off some really weird synchronicities and dreams, and possibly sabotaged the audio of the resultant podcast episode. So I thought, okay, so what if I read the same book as he does at the same time, and then we reconvene and we talk about that book, make notes, and we have a discussion. It's not necessarily about the book, but it's what that sparks off. So we chose Joshua Cutchin's Trojan Feast, mostly because I had it on my shelf and I never got around to reading it. My great excuse to actually read it and make notes and be more sort of disciplined with my reading. So I suggested this book to him, and he'd never heard of Joshua. He ordered the book, and we both read the book. So I'd literally only just got into the book, maybe a chapter, and I had this weird dream. And I don't have full-on dreams with like a narrative. They're just like messy images. So it was like a jumble of images. I was standing outside a house, and there was a rooftop. And on the rooftop, there was this guy who was sort of sat with his knees right up under his chin, like a long sort of thin legs. And he was just staring at me, I'd guess sort of 30 feet away or something like this. And it was sort of hairy, but it wasn't like straggly hairy. It was like matted, more like sort of monkey. He was just staring at me, quite sort of aggressive. And I think my feeling is that, obviously we were going to be talking about the Fae. My feeling is that somehow at some level they know that we're talking about them. They don't particularly like being talked about, maybe, unless we say the right things. Who knows? But he was glaring at me. Didn't say anything. He just glared at me, like, and it was that sort of knowing look, that sort of we know who you are, and you better watch your step, boy, sort of thing. That's what it came across like. So I thought this was quite amusing at the time, and I contacted Jeff online, and I said, look, I just started reading the book. I don't know if it's connected, but I had this dream, told him about it. And Jeff obviously had a different perspective than me, and he said, well, we should take this seriously. You shouldn't be laughing about it. There's something serious in this. And then very shortly after, I had a second dream. Again, I'm outside a house. I don't know if it was the same one. I'm outside a building. As I say, these are just like flash images. They're not a storyline. It's not like there's a build-up to it, then it happens, then it's up. It's nothing like that. It's just like, they're just like flashed images. I saw two little boys running towards me. The first one looked like my son when he was young, and he's like 31 now. He looked about 6 or 7, full of fun, just lively. And he sort of ran past me, and he was out of breath. He ran past me. I turned around. There's a door there. I mean, I don't even know this. It's just like I'm just reacting to the dream. He goes through the door, and he slams the door like he's trying to keep. There's a second boy. He's locked him out. And I look down and see this little lad, and he's sort of quite up. He's probably 5 or so, got very short, dark hair. I can see his face like very clearly. And he looked upset, but he'd been closed out by I think it was my boy, he looked like, very quick. And because I'm obviously myself in the dream, I'm 6'1", I crouched down to talk to the little lad in this dream. And I say to him, are you okay? And he's like sobbing. Then I said, what's your name? And he said, he just looked at me, and there was just like this really serious look on his face. He said, Victor. Now, it didn't mean anything to me, just Victor. I tried to remember my dreams. I'm not great at it. When I got up in the morning, I did make a note of it quick, because it was so clear in it. I felt after the last dream that there might be something in this. This was sort of bugging me, this Victor business. I'm reading Josh's book again. Again, it's Josh's book. It's the key to all of this. There were several things in there which sort of sparked my interest. There's others I won't go into today. He mentioned Mogwai, which you'll know, Mogwai, Chinese Fae, which I didn't know they were Chinese Fae. I had no idea. But I did know the name Mogwai because I liked Mogwai. You probably know, they're a Scottish band. I don't know much about them, but I did have an album of theirs going back to about, I think it's 2011 or 12. There's a track on it called Wizard Motor, which I remember. And I just loved that. It's very moody music. I see this reference to Mogwai, and I think, I know that name. I had no idea it was Chinese Fae. And then I thought, it was a band, and it got me thinking. And sometime that day, I went on YouTube, and I looked for Mogwai, and I thought, I'd find that music, because I enjoyed that, back in the day. And I hadn't listened to it since. So there's always thumbnails on YouTube, as you know, and it's got Les Revenon, or The Return. I didn't remember until that point that, yes, they had done the soundtrack for Les Revenon. So, which was a French TV series, which is really dark, creepy stuff. I mean, really creepy. Yeah. And that haunting music I'm just looking through its thumbnails, thinking I'll pick one, and I'm trusting on my memory to think which tracks did I really like, and I'm looking at because it's like 10, well, probably, yeah, it was 10, yeah, 10 years later at this point, I think. But I hadn't listened to them since. I found this track, Wizard Moto, and then there's footage of the series from the Return, Les Revenant, and it's sort of coming back to me, this story as I'm looking at it. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I remember now. And one of them, I think it was Wizard Motor, they're playing the music, and they've got footage from the series, and there's a little boy, and he's basically, if you remember the series, it was the dead coming back to life in this sort of border near Switzerland, I think. And they were coming back to life, and they were just coming back into the village. Really creepy story. And they were sort of wanting to be accepted again. And people were taking their dead daughter back or something and trying to hide her in the basement so the neighbours wouldn't see her. All this sort of creepy stuff. Yeah. So in this scene with this music, so it all sort of ties together. There's this lady, sort of middle-aged, maybe not, maybe 30s or something. And she's got this little boy with us. Little boy's sort of wormed his way back into her life. She didn't know who he was and lost his mother. And so I think she says to him, "Where's your mother?" And he said, "Oh, I want you to look after me because she's in heaven or something." And she said to him, and at this stage, I still haven't seen his face. They're sort of in an embrace, but it's sort of ringing a bell by now, by the time I'm watching it. And she said to him, "What's your name?" And he looked at her, and it was the same face, the same little boy, and he said, "Victor."
T'es perdu? Il s'appelle comment? Victor. Pourquoi est-ce que t'es venu me voir, moi?
C'est à cause de la fée.
I mean, what the hell? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Like the synchronicities, the way the different events will line up and become meaningful.
Yes.
But it could even be, like in terms of parapsychology, a sort of a precognition. You could have had the experience in your dream of seeing into the future, essentially.
Yes.
the moment
yes,
that you would video clip.
Yeah. I had this wonderful conversation with Jeff. And I was so proud of it. It was a really good one. I thought, this is going to be great. People are going to like this because he just comes at things from a slightly different perspective, really. He's just a quiet guy that reads a lot and has deep thoughts, very intelligent. Going through my audacity, trying to make the podcast, and this inexplicable reason, I lost a whole lot. And I searched and I tried everything. I went on to find software and stuff, searched for hidden files. I couldn't get it. I couldn't even tell Jeff for a long time. I couldn't even tell him. I just couldn't bait him. Not that he'd be angry. He wouldn't be angry, but I just felt I'd let him down because I'd lost it all after he'd gone to such an effort. So
was it Gremlins?
Yeah, Gremlins in the Machine. When I did have the recording and I was going through editing, there were lots of very strange, sort of audible, weird stuff going on in the background. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but there's just every now and again, like voices. We had a quiet room. It's in the countryside, middle of nowhere, really. Cats had been banished to another room. There was nothing in there that could have made the noise other than Jeff or myself. And it was like a low, very low sort of, like voices, but you couldn't understand. And I just wonder whether something on that audio didn't sit well with them. And maybe they were sort of, and you could tie that back to the guy on the roof, sort of like, oh, we're watching. So maybe it wasn't meant to be. So
exactly, yeah.
Sorry, that's a rather long story, but just odd.
No, it's interesting. I like this because it's interesting that these experiences kind of pan out, and that sometimes they don't.
Pan's a very good choice.
Single event. Yeah, multiple things coming together, different strands.
Yes,
and then we kind of form meaning for those disparate kind of threads. Interesting. I'll just give one little example of how these kind of weirdistic kind of things work. I went to in the village here in Llangonog where I grew up, did a little TV, and it was in Welsh and it was about the folklore of the Tanat Valley. We went up the hill, fairy hill called Craig Rhywach in the village where I grew up. According to the folklore, fairies would come out of the caves, and we went up there to film this thing about them. And then I read this little piece of folklore that said, if you go up Craig Rhywach on an autumn day, when the mists come down, then you're pretty much guaranteed to encounter fairies. We didn't see any fairies. We didn't film any fairies, but I did spot in this little, like they put those dynamite holes in the mine. So we went in and we found one of these little charge holes. I looked in, and there was a cluster of, I thought they were bees at the time. And I was like, oh, wow, look at this, solitary bee living in this.
Like a borehole thing, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And then a guy came over and he took a photo of it. And he sent the photo of these, what we thought were, to the Royal Entomological Society. They were amazed because this was the highest point that these insects had ever been recorded at. Yeah. And they were actually hoverflies that disguise bees. So this is, again, another bit of a weird story, but it's the sort of the synchronistic nature of it.
Yes.
So we went up there to didn't find fairies, but we found these insects that disguise themselves as bees. And then I found this other piece of Welsh folklore that said that the bees are the messengers of the fairies. So if you want to promote fairy life, then you need to kind of promote bees as well, because wherever there are bees, you'll find fairies.
Yes.
So we thought they were bees. They were hoverflies, but they disguised themselves as bees. In the same ways that, fairies use glamour to disguise themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
So in a way, although we went to find fairies, we ended up finding something else. But something was trickster-like in the same way that fairies are, disguising.
That's incredible. Finally, we had a brief discussion on the origins of the Tanat Valley, which is the place where Jack was raised and he lives. It's a mountainous region in mid-Wales. I was looking that up. The first thing you come, there's some special type of grape. And then you've got the deity, Tanat. My first thought was that, because I'd heard of it. And again, synchronicity. I was reading a book just like the day before by my friend Bob Osborne, who I interviewed yesterday. And very early on in his book, he mentions the deity Tanat in relation to Cornish folklore. And then I think, well, the Cornish and Welsh are basically the same tribe, as you will know. Some went to Wales, what is Wales, and some went west downwards. And then I thought, well, the climate obviously changes over centuries. I was thinking the grapes angle. Well, maybe they were growing grapes in Wales 2,000 plus years ago. And then you've got the whole link between researching this for years between Cornwall and Wales as well. Or Britain, let's just say Britain, really. And the Middle East, like Syria and so on, and Tunisia. Tunis is Tanat again.
Carthaginian.
But that all ties together. So you could have had these migrants coming up round, and they come up the northwest coast, which is where you've got all those Celtic tribes along there, as you know.
It doesn't really have an explicit meaning in Welsh, but tan in Welsh, it means fire. I was reading a bit of a sort of debate about where the etymology of Tanat is, and some people have suggested that it might be sort of the fiery one. And I got my own little pet theory about this, because the River Tanat basically runs kind of east-west. So if you're in a particular place at sunrise or sunset, then it's possible that the whole river might appear to be shimmering with red, in which case it would be a fiery river. I think I'll have to try and test that one day. Go down to the river and see. So
down in Cornwall, they used to have these, obviously the tin mines and so on, and the waste from that extraction process made the rivers run red. And maybe the mining in Wales did the same thing.
Possibly, yeah.
There were always academics studying this weird stuff that we all enjoy. When I was growing up, I read lots of books by and listened to the likes of people like Colin Wilson, Archie Roy and Ronald Hutton, to name but a few. And many others too. And more recently, highly intelligent people like Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Radin, and again many more, have joined us in our weird studies. I'm confident that in years to come, when we've all transitioned into whatever it is that comes next, today's guest, Dr. Jack Hunter, will still be required reading to the future generations that are still searching for answers to the nature of reality and consciousness, and maybe old podcasts from the 2020s with what will be outdated audio technology by then, of course, with guests like Jack, will also be sought out by students of high strangeness, perhaps even the Cuckoo Town podcast. Well, don't knock it. Stranger things have happened, You've been listening to the Cuckoo Town podcast, and I've been your host, Mark Anthony Wyatt. It's a Leviathan media production, copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2023. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please spread the word by telling all your family and friends about the Cuckoo Town podcast. Please like, share and subscribe too. We're on all the major podcast platforms and we're on YouTube. We'll see you next time then, when we'll take another stroll together down a road less travelled. Oh, and just one more thing before I go. Be lucky. Now I'm going to play you out with some of Jack's music, as promised. They call themselves Mascot Moth. This is called Ellis the Horn. The personnel are Shoned Hamlin on drums, Jack Hunter on bass, and David Thomas on guitar and vocals.
Dance without